All right, what's going on, guys? We are going to be doing the install tutorial for our 99 to 06 4-link kit. We'll also be covering the high clearance notch kit, coilover crossbar, and axle bracket install as well. All right, so first things first, we're gonna go over the demo. The hard part of the build is definitely getting everything out of the way. So we're gonna pull the leaf springs out, which you've seen that Jacob's already done here. We're gonna go ahead and cut back the heat shield that goes over the exhaust. So cut out the section just before the tank cross member. That way you can put a bolt to hold it nice so it doesn't rattle all the way back to the end of the truck. Sometimes those Torx bits have a habit of stripping out. They're kind of old. A lot of these trucks have seen some abuse. So drop the spare tire. If you need to, you can cut the head off of those to get them out of the way. The other thing that you'll want to do is a lot of guys are going to want to cut the shock mounts off of the axle. Sometimes you can kind of get away with it. You can kind of cut 1/2 of them, but for a nice clean install, I prefer to just cut them off. Whether you cut it with a plasma or a Sawzall and just grind them smooth, it makes everything look nice and finished when it's all done. So you'll go ahead and cut this guy and this guy off, blend it all smooth, and it will really help you with the overall install. Once you do that, you'll want to wire wheel everything from the inside of this brake line bracket. Your new coilover axle bracket's going to sit right about here, and you'll do about the same. Measure in from your axle flange to where this is currently. Do the same on this side and prep the axle tube there as well so that everything welds really nicely. So another thing we like to do is we like to cut out this channel right here above the frame. So that's going to be where your high clearance notch goes. If you're doing a high clearance notch, I would recommend cutting it from about where that opening is out. I like to leave the center section of the bed in. Typically, I'm not lowering the truck 6 inches in the rear, so I don't necessarily need this to be removed, but if you are, you will need to remove the full channel. This high clearance notch kit with a shorter bump stop will allow this to travel all the way until it touches the sheet metal under the bed. If you're not going to lower the truck that much though, I think it's really advantageous to keep that channel in there. It just keeps the bed floor a lot more rigid. The other thing is that high clearance notch is gonna go all the way up and touch the underside of the bed. So it will actually support the bed floor and the channel will keep it rigid from there. All right. So one thing to do before you get rid of this channel entirely is going to be line up our template that we send with all the high clearance notch kits and mark everything out. While you're cutting everything, you might as well cut this as well. So get this lined up, get this frame registering hole lined up, get this set up with the channel, and this lines up with where the frame is sectioned from the factory. Mark this out. It goes pretty much to the top edge of the frame, but you retain the top so you don't actually cut the frame entirely in half. And then just go ahead and mark some of these holes. Now you should be pretty much ready to go. On some of these trucks, you may need to cut the exhaust to make clearance for the coilover crossbar and a few other things that come along with the 4-link. You can do that now or later. Just use your best judgment. Another thing to consider when you're doing all of this is that you need the frame to be supported on both sides when you're about to cut that much out of it. You can, if you're doing it on the ground, you'll want to have a jack stand in the front and a jack stand in the rear. The bed will also kind of help keep everything straight, but I would also recommend you only do side to side. Even with everything supported, it's still being bolted to the bed. You don't want anything moving out of the factory spec. One thing I like to do in the very beginning, and it's another reason why I mark out the holes on this to also kind of help make sure that nothing moves from the factory spec, but I'll go ahead and punch 2 of the holes. Typically, I'll take the farthest 2 apart. So I wanted to give you guys a little bit of a tech tip on some of this stuff. This works for when you're drilling your frame, whenever you're doing a track bar install, but a lot of people have issues. They try and use some cheap drill bits or bits that are a little bit dull, what have you. With these builds, the leaf spring hardness and the frame hardness is much different than most just traditional mild steels. That's, you know, relatively soft, easy to drill. The key to these is slow speeds, sharp bit, and keep it lubricated to keep the heat off of it. If you generate any heat where you're trying to drill, it just makes the steel harder and leads to a lot more frustration. So we have a couple different bits that we're going to start listing on the website. Not really something we're making any money off of, but just it helps with the install, and we'll show you what we use and what we've had good luck with. The other thing that I would recommend is run some sort of lubricant. So like I personally like Bow Lube. It was developed by Boeing specifically for all of their aircraft related stuff. But the name of the game is keep it cool. Don't let the bit get hot. Don't let the material get hot. And it'll ensure that you're able to get through these a lot faster. So one of the things I wanted to point out on these high clearance notches is this particular alignment plate right here. We did include that initially so that you could use that and these two flange head bolts to line everything up when you put everything together, and that'll keep everything straight. But as time went on, we found out that sometimes it's easier to just leave everything loose, do the outside plate first, and bolt everything together. So you're more than welcome to use this plate. Sometimes it can cause some complications. You have to notch the frame a little bit more, etc. But it's totally up to the end user. All right, so we got the outer frame plate on. We got most all the bolts in and through with all the spacers on. You notice the front two holes haven't been drilled yet. That's because I like to get everything bolted up and tight first. And those front two bolts don't use the spacers because they actually sandwich the only part of the frame that is boxed. So we'll go ahead, get the other side bolted up. It will tighten everything on this side of the frame, and then we'll run the drill bit through the other side and put the last two bolts in. So another thing I like to do, just on some of these trucks where, like, this is a buddy of mine, so he's gonna be towing a boat, putting a lot of heavy stuff in it. One extra measure I like to do is burn it in, kind of like a traditional notch. Even though you already have 11 half-inch bolts holding this thing on here with crush spacers and 2 3/8 plates, we're gonna go ahead and heat up the powder coat right here, knock it off with a wire wheel, and then later in the build, once everything's all together, we'll put a nice MIG weld on it and touch it up with some paint. All right, so these are our coilover axle brackets. We designed them specifically for the 99 to 06 trucks, and they will locate on the brake line bracket that's on the factory axles, which kind of helps you get everything lined up. It'll set your coilover angle with a pretty good pinion angle for most settings, anywhere from stock to 6-inch drop. They also have provisions for the sway bar connection for one of our add-ons down the road for a rear sway bar. The other thing that they do that's kind of neat is you can separate them and it becomes a 360 style bracket, which normally you have to have the flanges cut off the axle, slide them on from the edge, But the nice thing about that is when you weld around the tube 360 degrees, you have less propensity to bend the tube. And doing a lot of work alongside axle pros, we see a lot of housings where they're killing axle bearings and whatnot because the axles have been welded on, they're bent, and they put a lot of side load on the bearing. So I'll bring you over to the axle right now and show you how these go on. So you just take out the bolt that used to hold on the factory brake line right here, and that'll locate your first bracket. Put that guy back in there, and you're all set. We already prepped this housing quite a bit, but typically you'll want to lock that down, mark it with a Sharpie, and get it really clean with some emery cloth so you can get a nice weld all the way around. Next thing you do, put this other side on there. Sometimes they get a little tight. We fit them pretty tight on the axle. Get this guy started in there. You'll go ahead and sink it down. So before you get to welding it, we left this little V cut out right here. You want to make sure this tab is lined up between these two on the other side, and then you'll put a nice big tack weld right there on each side. That'll really lock everything down and get you ready to weld. All right, next order of business, you're going to want to measure in from the back of your axle flange over here. Try and get as straight a shot as possible. So this one shows about 16.5 inches to the outside edge here. We're going to go ahead and mark this side the same. We already have the two halves put together. We'll line it up. Go ahead and mark it. And now we'll take an angle measurement from the other side. Either match the angles side to side, or if you have a digital angle finder like this one, you can zero it out. And then we'll go ahead and move it over to this side. Once that's all done, go ahead and tack it in place. So now we're ready to weld. One of the last things I like to check, even though there are two brackets side by side, really helps kind of keep it square right out the gate. They do have the ability to move a little bit, so I like to put a square on there, make sure that everything is vertical and perpendicular to the axle tube before I secure it down with a few more welds. For a couple extra style points, or if you're going to drop this off to a professional to have them weld it, you may also want to have them weld the center section to the tubes. On some of these trucks making somewhere around 400 to 500 horsepower or more, they can have a tendency to actually twist the tubes in the housing. So you're already here, you're doing all the work, the housing's already hot. We're going to go ahead and burn the tubes into this center section as well. Okay, next step in this deal, we're going to take our chassis bracket. These guys go right in the factory leaf spring hole, so we'll go ahead and get the main bolt in, get them kind of started. So with these guys, everything is pretty much self-explanatory. When you put the 1/2-inch bolts, bolting the modular plate to the chassis bracket, pretty much lines everything up in place. Clears the bed bracket right here. The crossover bar also lines up with the cutouts in the frame. On some trucks, you might run into some space constraints. So what we did is we actually made this 3D printed part that will go through. So you can take this back off, get it out of the way. This key will hold everything in place. And then you're going to take your drill and just spot these 3 spots in the frame right here. Pull everything off, drill your holes, and bolt it on. All right, so next you're going to want to find your axle brackets. These are the bottom side of them. Grab those. You'll grab the box with the crush spacers, and then you're also going to want to grab the 5/8 bolts that are a little bit shorter and don't have a nylock with them. Bolts on, you are going to want to put anti-seize on the threads. This will just kind of keep everything lubricated, and it'll help you get to a pretty good torque spec that's a lot more accurate if the threads are lubricated. Next, you'll go ahead and take the bracket. The one with this tab sticking off of it is actually going to be for the panhard mount, so this will go on the driver's side. The one without that provision is for the passenger side. Each kit gets 2 crush spacers, 2 bolts, 2 washers, and an upper bracket. Start the rear bolt first, just so it kind of helps you hold everything together if you don't have someone providing you with the second set of hands. Try and be carefully pull these brake lines out of the way, but this is going to wrap around the factory leaf spring perch, which locks in all of the geometry that I designed with this kit. This crush spacer has a flat spot. This is to provide clearance for the leaf spring perch, so you want it facing in when you tighten everything down. These 2 little ears go up inside the leaf spring perch and lock everything in place. Doing the install on most of this stuff, I don't like to put a ton of torque into everything right out the gate. I want to get all the bolts started, make sure everything's nice and fluid. So I'll usually use a small impact or a ratchet when doing all my initial install. You'll want to guide the crush spacer by, it has a tendency to spin, but the flat side needs to stay in towards the leaf spring perch. And everything's built with a really tight tolerance. Between variations from truck to truck on the axles and variations on the actual axle brackets, even though super minute, it can make all this really tight fitting, which is a good thing. But sometimes you'll need to take a dead blow and kind of help everything move together nicely. The upper axle brackets are directional, so the way you can tell which side is which is this overlay plate needs to face towards the outside, and that will give all the links the proper clearance so that they clear the frame under any articulation going up driveways and whatnot. If you do switch them side to side, you will notice that these holes, instead of being favored to the inside, will be on the outside, and this overlay will be on the inside of the axle. So make sure that they are on the right side of the axle with the overlays facing out and the mounting bolt holes favored towards the inside. Now this should be all pretty much ready to go to where we can start installing all of our links and getting everything loosely put together. If you're one of our bigger horsepower guys making upwards of 500 horsepower, you may want to consider welding this bracket to the actual axle housing. Real easy to do. Just heat up the powder coat with a torch and take your wire wheel, clean that up, and burn that to the housing. That'll make sure nothing moves, everything stays really tight, and you won't have any issues. The other thing that you can do if you're really concerned is actually burn the upper mount to the leaf spring perch as well. But generally, as long as you're always checking your bolt torque on these bolts up top, you should be good to go. Now that we have the axle brackets in place, what we can do is start putting on the coilover crossbar as well as the panhard bar and mount setup. So with the panhard mount, there's this little donut that comes in the bolt kit. Go ahead and pull that out. And you'll notice that two of the threads or the nuts are already welded to this bracket. You can go ahead and pull off the nylocks up at the chassis. You'll actually use the threads in the bracket. And then with your coilover crossbar in place, this is going to go over the top of that, which will create a 1/4 inch gap because of the coilover crossbar mounting flange right here. So this donut goes right here and acts as a spacer to keep everything level and allow you to torque everything down. You'll want to make sure that you get the brake line bracket on the outside of the coilover crossbar. You don't want it underneath because it'll hold the mounting flange crooked and it won't let you torque everything down properly without bending your hardware. Once you have everything relatively lined up, you can go ahead and start adjusting your center adjuster bolt, and it will widen the coilover crossbar until everything is ready to be torqued down. We're not going to kill it right now, we're just going to get it snug. Like I said, I like to assemble everything relatively loose, make sure everything's not binding, everything's kind of working together, and then at the very end we'll torque everything to spec. We're already going to be opening up this bag to get the spacer out, so we'll go ahead and set that guy there. Keeps everything on the same mounting plane. We'll go ahead and slam the coilover bolts up in the coilover crossbar so we don't lose them when we can toss the bag. Take the panhard mount, line it up. You can go ahead and start these two threaded bolts into the mounting plate, and then we're going to put a washer and nylock on the one through hole. Locate your panhard bar in your hardware kit and hang the panhard bar in place so that it's ready to connect to the axle brackets a little bit later. Take your 5/8 bolt and again, just loosely assemble it until we're ready to torque everything at the end. The adjuster here on the panhard, this will actually be one of our points of adjustment to make sure that the axle's centered in the truck and everything is aligned the way it needs to be. Now, we may have mentioned it before in other videos, but we do offer the universal panhard and coilover crossbar plates. These will basically reproduce this whole scenario right here without having to run our high clearance notch. Some of you guys already have trucks with notch frames. Some of you aren't going to be lowering the truck enough to where you need a notch. This will actually allow you to go. This will slip over the frame. We have one for the 99 to 2000 trucks and one for the 01 to 06 trucks with a little bit taller frame. And one will go on each side, giving you all the bolting points for the panhard mount and the coilover crossbar that you can see here. Now that we have the coilover brackets welded to the axle brackets on, and the chassis brackets, we are going to start doing the install on the 4-link bars. We'll go ahead and start taking the bushings or rod ends, depending on what you have, adding anti-seize to the threads, assembling them, and getting them on the truck. You can see at this point that we have the brake line bracket bolted up tight on the high clearance notch, and we've bent over the line to fit everything nicely. It doesn't require too much bending to make everything clear and utilize the bracket that we've included. Another thing you may want to do, but it's optional, is to turn the T around on the housing. This particular fitting typically faces the soft line forward, but in lowered applications, the soft line can come into contact with the C-channel on the underside of the bed, and it also tends to put the line in somewhat of a bind. So if you spin it around and switch the passenger and driver side hard lines to it, it can give you a little bit more clearance and make the install a little bit nicer. When you're getting everything ready to go, you want to get all of these hard lines bent and out of the way. So carefully bend them and look at where your travel is going to be. On some trucks, you don't have to worry too much about the actual notch itself. Some trucks you do. So you'll want to bend everything and make sure it clears your coil over. Anything else that it will come in contact with the cycle of the suspension, so that you don't have any issues with it pinching the brake line. This particular setup, we just have everything zip tied out of the way until we get everything tightened up and squared up, but we will go back and bend all of these lines so that they don't come into contact with the chassis later. One of the other things you may want to do while the tank is pulled over is, on some of these trucks, the tank gets a little bit close to the farthest forward high clearance notch bolts. If you're running that notch kit and you still want to run all of these bolts and clearance is an issue, you may want to shorten some of the bolts and possibly even the nylock to allow for more clearance when everything is assembled and tight. You do not want the tank to touch the bolts even a little bit when everything is tight and back in its place. It can rub through the tank and cause a leak. Once everything is bolted up and all of your links are set up in the truck, you're going to want to make sure that the wheel is centered in the wheel well. Typically, we want to put the truck on its own weight at this point, so in this case, we're using wheel cribs to set the truck down while it's still on the lift. Some of you guys will be doing this on the ground, so it's essential that you compress the shocks, get everything to where it's going to be, and set your wheelbase as one of your first adjustments. The next thing you're going to want to do is come in and adjust your track bar. Again, you're going to want the truck to be on its own weight, because as a track bar moves through its travel, it's going to push the axle left or right. So you want the truck to be at ride height when you're setting your axle center. One thing that can help you when you're trying to figure out where your wheelbase adjustment is supposed to be is pay attention to the location of the upper bump stop and where it's going to contact the axle. The upper bump stop is designed to land dead center on the bump pad, which should be in line with axle center line. So if you get these two lined up, either visually or with a plumb bob, it can get you off to a really good start so that you can fine tune everything from tire to bedside. Once you've picked out where you want your wheelbase to be and you've centered the axle left to right, the next thing that you want to do is adjust the links so that you have the right pinion angle. On your extended cab trucks, you're going to have a carrier bearing, and you want to adjust your driveline angle so that your yoke on the pinion is parallel to the yoke at your carrier bearing. And on your standard cab trucks, you want to make sure that the output shaft on the transmission is parallel to your pinion. So when you're trying to set your pinion angle, what you want to do if you're running a carrier bearing is you're going to go ahead and measure the downward angle of this yoke. So you can either take note of it being 3 degrees down in this instance, or you can zero it out if you're running a digital angle finder. And then what you want to do is make sure that this angle upwards counteracts it, which in this instance we're already at 0.1 of a degree off. But in most cases, you're going to be pretty drastically out of whack until you adjust your upper and lower links to set the pinion angle correctly. So what you can do, if you're trying to bring the pinion angle down, is you can either extend the upper link or collapse the lower link. If you've already set your wheelbase, you're going to want to split the adjustment between the top and bottom. If you haven't set your wheelbase yet, you can pretty much adjust it whichever way is easiest. However, you will need to go back and verify that the wheelbase is correct once you're all done. So on this particular truck, we have the coilovers adjusted pretty high. It's going to be a shop truck where he's going to be transferring motors around and transmissions and whatnot. So we actually set the coilover to the highest adjustment to get it close to a stock height setup. We could add more preload to the coils in order to do so, but for starters, I like to keep the coils as soft as possible. We're just going to max out the adjustment and keep the preload on the coil at a minimum. We can slowly add coil preload later on if we need to. Alright guys, that pretty much concludes our 99-06 Silverado 4-link kit install. Hopefully that worked out for you. If you have any questions or concerns with the kit, feel free to reach out to us, shoot us an email, or leave a comment, and we'd love to hear how everything went for you and what you think of the kit.